Yep. So after you've done npm install, the first thing you have to do is install Firebase. So that would be npm install Firebase. And again, it would be in the directory of the app. So this is going to take some while to load in. And while that happens, let's let's manage the UI of this. So um, Firebase has this really good web console. And if you, a lot of stuff happens on this console, so you don't have to worry a lot about making manual changes to the code or anything. And that's the link go to. So to get started with it, first we go to add project, and you can give any project name to your apps. I'm just gonna call it recipe workshop. And for now, let's disable analytics because we aren't going to be using it on our app. But analytics is again a really good tool you can use and implement analytics code into your app to know when a user is on certain page or clicking a certain thing in a specific page. And you also get really good metrics about user, like what location they are on, which system they are coming from, and all that fancy stuff. And after we've set up our project, we are going to go and set up an app. So in the homepage for Firebase in your project, you're going to see this iOS, Android, and web apps. We're going to click on the web one, and we have to give them give it a nickname. And this is totally unrelated to your app. This can be anything you want. I don't think this name is ever used ever. And for now, we don't need to set up Firebase hosting, and we can just register our app. And we can just ignore this for now. We'll come back to all this config later. Let's continue to console. And over here, you should see it's been created by the one app over here. So now let's set up the database. We go to Firestore. And then from Firestore, we click on create database. And for now, let's just keep all the defaults as it is. We are going to go and change it later. But what do these settings do is the second one actually tells you asks us which location we want our database to be on. So Firestore is actually a cloud database, which means all your information is in a physical data center somewhere in Google's offices. Over here, I just went with the default one, but you have lots of options. And the first one just said which rules you want to go forward with. And creating a proper set of rules is important because you don't want anyone to read or write into them. There are a lot of rules that you can make. Like right now, the default is set as that absolutely no one can read and write into it. We are going to change it to true over here on line 5, which means anyone can read and write into it. Usually it's not a secure way to make apps, but since this is just a demo, we are going to go forward with it. There's also really good resources available online, which tells you how to create your security rules based on what your app is doing. And we just published these rules. And that should be it with setting up our database. Like over here, you'll see a really nice UI. Right now it seems blank, but when we start putting data into that, you can actually see the tabular flow of how data is organized in here. And we can go on to the next step. So the next thing actually starts from here, we are going to start on the IDE side. So let's go to our IDE and doing VS Code over here. And we open the app, open the folder. And we are going to start by going to this src folder. We are going to be handling the components folder inside src and the files in the pages folder. And as we talked about in the React workshop, React works on components, which means you can make a component and reuse them in all the other pages you have. Right now, we are going to make a Firebase component. So in components, let's create a file called db.js. And let's go back to the Firebase console. Um, Next to the project overview, there is a gear icon, which includes a set of settings. And let's go to the base project settings. And now if you scroll all the way down, beneath Firebase SDK snippet, let's change it to config. And this is the config for our app. We are gonna copy and paste this into the db.js file we just created. And this basically tells Firebase what is the configurations. So it takes all of the rules we created, the Firebase Firestore setup, and bundles it inside this. And each of the setting is related to an API key over here. Um, Generally, a good practice is not directly putting the API key out here. You are supposed to like create a env file, or not like if you're pushing this code out onto GitHub or any public domain, not like push this file out or like put all the API keys into a env file and then call it from that env file. But right now we aren't pushing any code out to any public domain, so we are gonna go with this. And after we are done with this, let's copy this lines of code and paste it right below the Firebase config. So what this says is, let's call Firebase. Let's say that let's tell this file that it requires the Firebase module that we just did from npm install Firebase. And we also need the Firebase/Firestore module. So these two are actually different things. Firebase just has the base Firebase, which is the shared components from all of the features that it offers. And then with Firestore, you also have the functions and features from the Firestore library. And they split it up so that you don't have a heavy download. The third line just tells you, let's initialize this Firebase with this Firebase config. And then we create a database from Firebase Firestore, and we are going to export this database. And the last line is basically a React line, which just says the default export of this file is the DB variable we just created, which is the database. And let's save this. And this is how you basically initialize any Firebase app. So if you're not working with Firestore, if you're working with something else, these lines are going to be really similar. You're always going to have a Firebase.initialize app. And then based on which feature of Firebase you're using, it would be Firebase.firestore, or like you can do war auth is equal to Firebase.authentication, and so on and so forth. And we can go to the next step now, which would be writing data in. And by this point, if you haven't done npm start, you should be able to do npm start, and ideally you shouldn't get any errors. So let's start with actually writing data in. In the pages folder, let's go to add recipe, which as the name suggests, it adds a recipe. Um, from the top, on the top line, we are gonna put this line in, which basically says, from the database component we just created, let's import the variable database. And let's take this code and add it right at the end of the save recipe function over here. So what this code does is it tells the database variable, which is Firestore, to go to the collection recipe, and if that recipe collection doesn't exist, we are going to create that collection. And in that collection, we are going to add this field called recipe, and the values would be the recipe variable we just made. Um, and then after it's added, it's going to just console log the document ID. And if it's unsuccessful to add it, it's just going to console log the error that it came with. And if we save it and go to localhost over here, go to add recipe. So let's try putting some dummy variables. I'm also going to have the console open here to view the console outputs. So in the console, we are seeing that there's the recipe thing we just created from console.log recipe. And we can also say that our document creation is confirmed, and we see the ID. And if you look at Firebase, we can see there's the our recipe collection, which didn't exist before. It has this field called this unique ID which just got, and inside that field, there is another field called recipe, which has the information about the recipe. And in this way, you can actually create a lot of nesting in. You can have fields which have collection inside it and have more fields inside it, or you can just make a really simple database with every collection having a really simple field. And if you were able to do that, we can just like click mark as completed and go to the next step. So now that we've written information into the Firestore, let's get information out of it. So let's go to recipe pages.js in the pages folder, and we'll copy the same import line. And it's going to do the exact same thing. It's going to import the database from the component we made. And over here is a function that we didn't see in the React workshop. It's use effect. And what this does is it continuously does something in that whenever it senses there is a change in change in a state. And right now it has this async function call and calling that function call. I've structured it in this way because we have to wait for some steps to finish before we do some other steps. And that's why it's like this weird function inside function. But if you don't have any steps which are dependent on other steps, you can just put code directly into use effect. Over here, we are going to copy this code and put it between the recipe array initialization and before the set recipes. So what this is going to do is it's going to go to the collection recipe, get everything, and that from the query that it got, it's going to go to each document. And in that, after going in that each document, it's going to take the data and then more specifically take the recipe field from the data and store that recipe field into as each element of the recipe array. And we are going to set the overall recipes which we discussed last time as the recipe array. And if we save this and go to the home page of our recipe app, you're going to see that we have this not so great looking recipe, but we have the data we got in. If you actually use this as a recipe book, you're going to see real nice recipes over here, and it's really easy to maintain. And that is basically how you read and write from database. And that's all there is to know about that's almost all there is to know about Firestore. The only extra thing I can tell you about is how this is maintained. So everything is a collection. Each collection has a document, and each document can have a collection or a field. And that's it. Yeah, that's it, I guess. And that was actually a really short workshop. If you have any like doubts or if you have any questions, you all can put that in the chat bot and I'll be happy to answer that for you all. Yeah, the document ID is always a random string. There is a function call where you can set the document ID to be something you want. So that would be when you do db.collection.add, you can do db.collection.set.add. And inside the set, you can put a document ID of your own. But over here, this was a case in which document ID wasn't a really important aspect. So we just let it be random. So if you all don't have any questions now, thank you for coming out. Hope you all learned something about Firebase today. If you all have any questions anytime, you all can just leave it in the uh, Discord that we have, and I'll be happy to answer it for you all.